Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Philos-o-clock with Netzsche Fatum. Today, we're tackling a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And we have a musical intro that I'm going to play for you here to get us in the mode. So everyone, please keep your voices down. Don't type too loudly. Why does it not open this link? Copy link. Fixing this. There we go. Is this Nietzsche 101? I think yes, basically. Shh, be quiet. It's a library. Ladies and gentlemen, Philos-o-clock with Netzsche Fatum, the philosopher. Come surf with us and we'll talk about stuff. The first Nietzsche episode ever. Nice. I feel like everyone knows that song. That's a good one. What a classic. I'm gonna call him. I'll phone him. Hello? Check 1, 2. I cannot hear you.
Hello, hello.
Now I can. What's up?
Oh, not much. Chilling in lovely Switzerland, waiting for snow to finally arrive. Well, we have snow, but just not a sufficient amount.
It's not the primo snowboarding shit yet.
No, definitely not.
Gotcha.
So, how was the vacation after all that streaming you did last year?
It was good. I didn't really realize how tired I was until I slept. Like the first 2 sleeps after the subathon, I slept for 10 to 11 hours each time. And I think that's just because the subathon has a constant mental pressure on the person because they know that the timer is running and it could run out while you sleep. And you don't know what's going to happen all the time. But you know that you have to be available and you want to like work hard through it and be in front of the camera as much as you can. So yeah, it was intense. 19 days, 24 hours uptime. Is it possible to turn up the guest? Yes, I can.
Check 1, 2. Am I loud enough?
He's up 10%. But yeah, it was good. And then I rested a whole bunch. And then my parents last minute offered to fly me out for Christmas and New Year. And I had a very delayed flight on my way there, but I did get there. And I had a nice week and a bit hanging out with all of them. So it was a good recharge, good time away from the camera. I did get one Jimothy video in and I got some new stream backgrounds, as you can see with the nice pupper one that we have. This dog one is kind of funny because the dog tag has my parents' phone number on it. So when it was first up there, we had to take it down and then edit it and blur it out so it doesn't give away unnecessary information. But she did a heckin' good job staying in front of the fireplace and not moving. I just have my phone on a phone stand, and she was content to just lay there and get some heat back because she was out running in the snow before this.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So, did your parents get a call before you noticed, or did you take it down fast enough?
I don't think they got a phone call yet. It was pretty early, and usually the first stream back, people aren't in the habit of checking out your stream, so I had like 30 or 40 viewers. It wasn't really a big data leak, and that stream was not published, so we should be good. Shout out to Cobra X for doing a last minute blur job of that one. But I did read some of the Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Nice.
I read the prologue and I got to on the 3 metamorphoses, but it's really interesting in the sense that it sets up everything to be a standard hermit in the mountains returns to town and they have the new religion that they're going to teach. But Zarathustra's take on everything is very different. It's a commentary where it talks about the prevailing religious opinions, so there's some overlap between the hermit returning to town, but then some pretty big differences. I don't know what of the book we're going to read through this time, but for people who don't know, Nietzsche is Ecce Fatum's #1 favorite philosopher, and he's a shoot from the hip kind of a philosopher where he is more colorful with how he talks, and he's not quite as dry and verbose as, say, like Karl Marx, where they just want to list off a whole bunch of shit. He has some hot takes. So you recommended Thus Spoke Zarathustra and even gifted me one. And this is a signed edition that's special, has Ecce Fatum in it. So this must have increased the value of this at least 11-fold. And he said, "Dear Mr. Neuro, I hope you enjoyed this book at least half as much as I did, did, for almost 2 decades. Best of luck in all your endeavors." So yeah, we've got Nietzsche and Zarathustra. Why did he write Thus Spoke Zarathustra as opposed to just a bunch of dry philosophy stuff? Because this is like a story that he's telling.
That's a good question, and I would have to say that I don't really know why he chose this way of writing it. I think it enables you to say things that you wouldn't necessarily put your own name behind.
Mm-hmm.
If he wrote Thus Spoke Nietzsche, he would have probably be a bit more limited in what he was able to say or what he would have wanted to say. But in the book itself, basically Zarathustra is Nietzsche, so he's just the conduit he speaks through.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a BBC documentary that I also linked you, and it talks briefly about where he was, what he was aiming for when he wrote the book. So it starts around, I think, 30 minutes. I linked it to you with the timestamp.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 chapters. The first is on Zarathustra, and the second is on the Ubermensch, or Superman. And we could listen to those 2 for everyone to get like a sense of what he was on about and what we're gonna experience today. And my thoughts going into this is, for me, there's a lot to talk about when we talk about Nietzsche, because it's fascinating, all the different things he wrote about, all the different ideas he came up with. But to give all of you a sense of this, I thought it'd be best to dive in head first, as I did, by having a look at the beautiful prose that is Nietzsche's Zarathustra.
Nice. So I've got it all set up here. Let me make sure the quality is correct. Here we go.
Nietzsche
It's about
fled
10 minutes of video. Prepare
in
yourself.
bleak mood. His books weren't selling. He was in bad health and often suicidal.
In March 1883, Nietzsche wrote, "In the deepest part of me, an immovable black melancholy holds sway. I cannot see even a reason to live beyond 6 months.
He realised that this was a true test of his own ability to face suffering and to overcome it.
I'm exerting every ounce of self-mastery, he wrote. Unless I can discover an alchemical trick to turn this muck into gold, I am lost.
But in the depths of his misery, he poured himself into writing a new book. One which would prove him to be just such an alchemist. It was the work that he considered to be his greatest. Thus spoke Zarathustra.
Zarathustra had huge impact. It inspired composers like Richard Strauss and writers from Joyce and Kafka to Yeats and Camus. A parody of the Bible that Nietzsche referred to as the fifth gospel, it's centred around the spiritual journey of a mysterious, mystical character called Zarathustra. And in it, the philosopher introduced one of his most notorious concepts, the Ubermensch, or Superman.
The book is a parable on the importance of self-overcoming. The imagery is of the mountains, and the figure of Zarathustra echoes Nietzsche himself. Two of its 4 books were written here, in the guest house where Nietzsche often stayed.
It is remarkable being here, isn't it? Because it's in this room that Nietzsche wrote one of his most groundbreaking and influential works.
This is the place where he first had the ideas about Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Zarathustra is a prophet who comes down the mountain, and he wants to talk to people in a town about this great event, that God is dead, that Christianity, with all its certain universal absolute moral values, is no longer believed in, and that the question of what it is to be human and how one is to live as a human needs to be answered anew. But nobody listens to Zarathustra.
And one of the mechanisms to deliver that is this difficult concept, the Ubermensch, the overman or the Superman. Who or what exactly is that?
It's easier to say what it is not. It's not a biological concept. It's not some kind of superior human race. An Ubermensch is someone who is no longer reliant on inauthentic external goals society gives him or her, parents, religions. It's someone who is able to commit to goals that you set yourself. You offer humanity goals, and Nietzsche thinks it's a terrifyingly difficult task because the guidelines are missing. There are no blueprints. And whilst you full well know that whatever task you set yourself isn't universal, isn't good for all, it's nevertheless one you commit yourself to. It's one you strive towards. The Ubermensch is someone who can shift and see that the responsibility and the joy of creating life lies not with some transcendent God, but lies within oneself.
In pouring himself into writing Zarathustra, Nietzsche not only gave his own life meaning in the face of suffering, but he also began to see that suffering itself was the key to unlocking the elusive secret of happiness.
So what do you think happiness is for Nietzsche?
We traditionally see happiness in opposition to pain, exertion, suffering, etc. For him, that is not the case. It's striving towards something. It's suffering through that great task you've set yourself. So just flying up onto the summit of a high mountain in a helicopter will not give you the kind of feeling of happiness that you experience when you have spent 15 days walking towards the summit. It's overcoming obstacles that resist you achieving that goal that is part of the experience of happiness.
So it's not just pleasure but pain that can be
Pain
happiness.
is almost an enabling condition for happiness.
Just real quick, thinking about this in the framework of being a Dota 2 and a StarCraft player, yeah. The more of a hassle it is to get the win, the more satisfying the win is. I get it.
Nietzsche never found love again, but he'd succeeded in transforming his despair into a work whose vision would go on to resonate with generations of artists and thinkers. He'd become a living testament to his idea of the eternal return. And he now turned his attention away from the loss of meaning created by the murder of God to the crisis of values left in its wake. Nietzsche continued his restless journeying around Europe. Although his health was deteriorating, it didn't stop him
Yeah,
from
so
writing a
this
subversive
was the
work.
part I wanted to show you. Now we're
Beyond
switching
good
over
and
to
evil.
his next book. So I think we can cut it here.
Well, this is the
Nietzsche
Ubermensch.
himself thought the book
Oh, no,
Yeah.
Beyond Good and Evil.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, sweet. So basically, he's in a tough spot, and like many really good writers and thinkers, oftentimes your best work is not popular when it's first published, and you kind of write it when you're in a pretty bad spot, but you're making some breakthroughs. And Zarathustra, if I'm thinking about that, is him writing himself into the story. Also was pretty meager in their existence. They weren't some royal who had consorts and kingdoms and knights and all that kind of stuff. They were a person who just went out into the mountains. Is Zarathustra a god or a person? Can't remember from the book.
Well, I would say that he's a prophet, and like the thing he's invoking with the name is Zarathustra of old, the Zoroastrian prophet. But he's not that. So what he's trying to set up is a prophet that teaches the teachings of this world and not another one. So not in the framework of we're aiming for heaven or hell, but we're aiming to live a meaningful existence in the here and now. And this was to some extent, but not the whole extent, what he was talking about in his saying that God is dead, that we're not living a life for an afterlife anymore, but we're living a life in this existence. So the question came up in chat how I decided to have you play the same music as is played in the video. The coincidence there is this is Richard Strauss basically putting into music Zarathustra's Descent from the Mountain. So this was a work that was written as an ode to Nietzsche's Zarathustra. And it bears the same name, so it made sense that it was used for both this talk and the video. Most famously used it in 1001 Space Odyssey, on that cut between the monkeys and then space.
Yeah, I read the prologue to Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and one of the things that Zarathustra talks about quite a bit is the comparison between other animals like apes and humanity, and then overmen, so people who have ascended in some way the patterns and conventions of humanity. And I thought it was really interesting as a breakdown because I think it's one of the concepts that transcends a particular religion, and that is that human beings have circumvented natural selection in a way that puts us in a different position on the planet. We're still animals. We're still bound by needing oxygen, and gravity needs to hold us to the earth so we don't fly off into space. And we're vulnerable, squishy creatures and stuff, but something about us is different. And what we do with that difference matters a lot. I think that's another thing that people can agree on. Humans wield a paintbrush of the fate of the world more so than a lot of other creatures do. And we have a lot more access to information than other creatures do. So Zarathustra is talking about what it takes to free yourself of a lot of those chains of conventions. But then also how you still define yourself. It's also... Go ahead.
Becoming who you are would be the notion there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like freeing yourself from the outside notions of who you have to be and becoming your full self.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it's a self-help book, although in a bit of a dark and twisted way.
Yeah. It's a self-help book saying that you can go in whatever direction that you want to, as long as you are true in your virtue and your conviction and all this kind of thing. And it is very contrarian in the sense that it goes against the established norms of whatever prevailing religions are out there. But he doesn't really specify which one they're talking about, so you could insert whatever. But he would have encountered Christianity the most, probably, being from Europe.
His father was a Protestant pastor.
Oh, so, yeah.
I think his father died when he was like 12, 13, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this was part of how he turned his back to the Christian faith, like the whole question of why do bad things happen to good people, I think was the first major question that raised doubt in him.
Yeah, for me, that was kind of similar to it. For me, it was why do people get born with really different circumstances, which is kind of similar to why do good things happen to bad people and bad things to good people, but also people who haven't really had the chance to demonstrate whether they're good or bad. Like little babies, some of them have some like major health issue when they're born, and they didn't live long enough to sin against God and to earn that per se. They just got dealt some crappy cards. And like a good video gamer, you'll always want to ask God, like, when's the next patch? Can we patch this? Can we balance this in some way? It doesn't seem very fair.
Yeah, I think the question there would be if it's the divine kind of intervention patch, or is it that we as God's conduit would need to adjust and patch it ourselves, which has been what we've been doing for quite some time.
That's true. Yeah.
And sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, but I think we're not on the worst possible trajectory. And we'll talk about this a lot when we talk about Beyond Good and Evil. We see a lot of things as good that not necessarily are, and we see a lot of things as bad that are also somewhat morally ambivalent. It's for the most part, it's neither of the two. But it's all a matter of interpretation.
Good or bad, depends on who you ask, but yeah, you do have some more overlap on certain topics than other ones. Most people agree that stealing is bad, that murdering is bad, that kind of thing. What people do in the privacy of their own home, how they worship, how they do sexual stuff, lots of opinions about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things they tend a certain direction, and rightly so, but it gets tricky when you go into the details. A couple of things I wanted to say about the lovely visuals we saw, those snowy Swiss mountains. So they are one valley over from where I live. So basically it takes me, I want to say like an hour to go to Sils Maria. It's a lovely little town. And the seclusion, he lived there in this small room where he was writing. There's some interesting notes from that time, where it's like basically some guy writing into his journal that he met this really weird dude at a bar. And so after you kind of get the context of it, at some point you realize, all right, he met Nietzsche in a bar, and he was just mind blown by how weird the guy was. And there's a lot of different people talking about Nietzsche as a person and how super weird he was. And it's just interesting to kind of get a sense of the man behind the book.
Weird in what way? How would they describe it?
Oh, he was a really good talker. Like you could have long conversations with him, but he was kind of antisocial. So he would not talk with you, he would talk at you.
I have a family member who does that. You can just kind of let him talk, and he will talk, and he will face you as though you are the person he's talking to, but whatever you say or don't say doesn't really matter. It's just going to keep going.
Yeah. And he was this mix of, I guess, an egomaniac to some degree, but also super insecure. So it was kind of, I guess he was just super hard to read on whether or not he was, how would you say that? Like, if he was, if you spoke to him and you didn't know, was he just putting you on the spot for something, or if he was expressing his true opinions or not. All right. So I sent you the book version of it. I sent you the Kaufman translation, which is one of the older ones, but Walter Kaufman was one of the prime American Nietzsche scholars. So I think it's a really good translation. Unfortunately, I was not able to find that version as a PDF for other people to look at, so I'll be reading from another version. And I link this in chat for people to read along if they want to, because it's one thing to hear me speak the words, but it's something else if you can also see it written. So there's the link in chat. And we will start off with the first of the speeches of Zarathustra. So this is when Zarathustra was 30 years old, he kind of left his home and went into the mountains to enjoy his solitude and basically to develop his thinking and his philosophy. And after 10 years, I want to say, he descended back down to the local village to talk about what he has come up with, what he has learned. And this was the part that you already read, which he also talked about the death of God and the transfer or the rope that is humanity between the ape and the Ubermensch. And now that we get into his speeches, he really develops all those themes. So we'll be looking, depending on time, since I've got no clue how long this will take. I looked for 5 different chapters from like all over the book. These are the chapters that to some degree resonate most with me and resonate a lot in terms of the prose used, because I think they're just beautiful. The images they invoke are just sometimes crazy, sometimes just beautiful, and we'll see a bunch of different Nietzschean themes develop over them. And the one other thing, since the original version is in German, and I'm blessed to be able to speak German, if I can get a show of hands from chat, if anyone speaks German, I could also sprinkle in some of the German terms he used, and then we can kind of look at how that translates and how the translation has sometimes got a bit awry, and what the differences are. So just show of hands in chat.
Someone who speaks vague German.
Yeah, not to offend you. I had a friend of mine in Japan, and he was fascinated with the German language, and he said he wanted to learn German to read Nietzsche. And I said, that's awesome, dude. All the power to you. But knowing German in order to read Nietzsche is like knowing how to boil water if you want to know how to make really good pasta. It's like, it's the bare minimum. It's really dense. It's really difficult. The kind of language he uses. So just knowing German will not get you too far, I'm afraid. Yeah, so I guess we'll stick to the English version for now, and then see how we're doing in that regard.
Cool.
So we'll start with the first of Zarathustra's speeches on the three metamorphoses. Three metamorphoses of the spirit I name for you. How the spirit becomes a camel, and the camel a lion, and finally the lion a child. To the spirit there is much that is heavy. To the strong, carrying spirit imbued with reverence. Its strength demands that what is heavy and heaviest. What is heavy? Thus asks the carrying spirit. It kneels down like a camel and wants to be well loaded. What is heaviest, you heroes? Thus asks the carrying spirit, so that I might take it upon myself and rejoice in my strength. Is it not this, lowering oneself in order to hurt one's pride? Letting one's foolishness glow in order to mock one's wisdom? Or is it this, abandoning our cause when it celebrates victory, climbing high mountains in order to tempt the tempter? Or is it this, feeding on the acorns and grass of knowledge, and for the sake of truth suffering hunger in one's soul? Or is it this, being ill and sending the comforters home and making friends with the deaf who never hear what you want? Or is it this, wading into dirty water when it is the water of truth, and not shrinking away from cold frogs and hot toads? Or is it this, loving those who despise us and extending a hand to the ghost when he wants to frighten us? All of the heaviest things the carrying spirit takes upon itself, like a loaded camel that hurries into the desert. Thus it hurries into its desert. So, what is the heaviest thing?
Aside from metal?
I guess.
The weight of reality. No. All of reality. A black hole? A supermassive black hole. It's pretty heavy.
That is quite heavy.
Yeah.
So what Nietzsche talks here in terms of the camel is the 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 person taking on the weight of the world, or the heaviest things there are to carry, in order to feel I guess to feel good about himself, and to know that he can and will carry the weight of the world. And he has a bunch of different aphorisms on what it could mean to have that heavy thing, to embrace one's own foolishness, or to walk away from your victories in order to dwell in your own faults, or to send the comforters home when you would like to have someone. So basically, the heaviness, this is all the bad things happening. And taking on this heaviness is what the camel does. It takes on the world.
Yeah, and that, I think, leads into what the lady was talking about in the video of happiness not necessarily being the opposite of pain and suffering, but being the gratification of enduring the pain and suffering for some goal. It's kind of connected to the overall pursuit of fulfillment. The camel can do fulfilling work in a few different ways.
Yeah, and it's also the concept of the eternal recurrence, when for the most part, not always, I'd say, the bad things that happen, the heavy things that happen to you, they will lead you somewhere. And the interpretation of where it led you to, the new space you occupy, the new mental state you're in, you could see that as being a good or a bad thing. But if you see everything unfolding over and over and over again, always the same, you have two choices: either to be crushed by knowing this will happen over and over again, or you can embrace the idea and be all the bad things that happen will lead me back to where I am right now, and this is a good thing because I am still who I am and I can still enjoy what it is to be me.
Yeah, that's an attitude of acceptance of whatever's outside of your sphere of control. You can either be in a state of despair about it, about what you cannot change and what's broken and bad and evil and all that, or you can say that that is a fact of my reality and I can still steer my ship somewhat in this big sea. Even if I don't control the whole ocean myself, you can still navigate. That is interesting too when you think about how if you take the secular, non-religious perspective, reality wasn't tuned or designed for this species in particular to have the best possible shake at things. And it certainly wasn't for a lot of other creatures that have gone extinct by now. So you're kind of dealing with the pretty scuffed system that wasn't really made for you. And it's very dangerous for you in a lot of ways. And it's scary, and there's inherently loss involved because we're, as far as we know, dealing with a state of mortality, where if something dies, then that's final. And because we're social, that matters a lot to us. So yeah, there's a lot to process for a person in life. And what you do with that is really tricky. And if you go the way of Zarathustra and you don't copy pasta whatever the religious doctrine is on the afterlife, then yeah, it can be pretty scary. I think a lot of people feel a sense of sadness with the standard thermodynamic model of dry science, of there was a big bang at the start and then there's going to be a heat death at the end of all things where stuff expands away from everything too fast that you can't really keep energy going. That's kind of a bummer, sort of an ending. Going to heaven and rocking out with Jesus and God and the angels and stuff, that sounds pretty cool. So with the Zarathustra or the Nietzsche approach to things where you don't get an afterlife mission or level that you exist on, how do you process the life that you have?
Yeah. Small correction there. You said heat death, but you described the cold death. So heat death would be when the universe gets sucked back into a black hole. And cold death is when it expands to the point where all energy is just spaced out so much that nothing is left.
Right, that's what I meant. I guess the phrase heat death to me was the death of heat. But yeah, it would be the cold end of things where, yeah, there's not enough energy to keep stuff going.
Yeah. And we're still uncertain which way we're going, but neither of which sound particularly pleasant, so I don't think we have to worry about it for the next couple millennia.
Yeah, it's pretty far off.
It will take a while.
A few billion.
It's like a time scale that we can have no means of comprehending. All right, so let's get back to the text. So all of these heaviest things the carrying spirit takes upon itself. Like a loaded camel that hurries into the desert, thus it hurries into its desert. But in the loneliest desert, the second metamorphosis occurs. Here the spirit becomes lion. It wants to hunt down its freedom and be master in its own desert. Here it seeks its last master and wants to fight him and its last god. For victory it wants to battle the great dragon. Who is the great dragon whom the spirit no longer wants to call master and god? Thou shalt is the name of the great dragon. But the spirit of the lion says, I will. Thou shalt stands in its way, gleaming golden, a scaly animal. And upon every scale, thou shalt gleams like gold. The values of millennia gleam on these scales, and thus speaks the most powerful of all dragons. The value of all things, it gleams in me. All value has already been created, and the value of all created things, that am I. Indeed, there shall be no more I will. Thus speaks the dragon. My brother, why is the lion required by the spirit? Why does the beast of burden, renouncing and reverend, not suffice? To create new values, not even the lion is capable of that, but to create freedom for itself, for new creation, that is within the power of the lion. To create freedom for oneself, and also a sacred no to duty, for my brothers, the lion is required. So, as the spirit walks into the desert, it wants, and taking on all the heavy things, all the burdens of particularly morality in this case, or all the values, the value judgments of yesterdays and yesteryears.
Mm-hmm.
The camel wants to be free of all of that, so it needs to confront the dragon that is all these old values, and needs to free himself from this social construct that is our duties, our responsibilities, and embrace his own will. The I will, I want to do this, I want to go a different path. That's what the lion is doing when he confronts the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
But the dragon, rightfully so, says all the value that was ever created, that is me. So basically, by becoming the lion, going against everything that was, you kind of defy humanity in a sense, where everything that we have right now is a playing out of the value systems that we had before. So that's why the dragon says, I am all the value that was ever created, and surely there shall be no I will. So basically, it's dangerous, and it's to some degree even problematic to free yourself from all of that baggage that is traditional morality, because it's the foundation of what society is built upon.
I like the phrase, once it loved thou shalt as its most sacred. That's how a lot of the Ten Commandments are started. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's property. Thou shalt not murder. It's commandments of you must do this thing, and it is set in stone. And that was a pretty common way that a lot of the main religious texts were organized, at least the Abrahamic ones for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and no doubt lots of other religions. So that would be something that the lion would be challenging, but those would be scales upon this dragon of the stuff that people have given value to.
Yeah. Yeah, but Nietzsche also says that just defying the old norms, the I will, that the lion wars, it's not creating anything new just yet. It's just defying the old. The lion is the king of its desert, but it's still in his desert and he's still trapped in the same framework to some extent. He's just defying it. So there is more transformation needed, or more metamorphosis needed, in order to become who you are. That is to create new values. So to create new values, not even the lion is capable of, but to create freedom for itself, for new creation, that is within the power of the lion. To create freedom for oneself, and also a sacred note to duty. For that, my brothers, the lion is required. To take the right to new values, that is the most terrible taking for a caring and reverent spirit. Indeed, it is preying, and the work of a predatory animal. Once it loved thou shalt as its most sacred, now it must find delusion and despotism even in what is most sacred to it, in order to wrest freedom from its love by praying. The lion is required for this praying. But tell me, my brothers, of what is the child capable that even the lion is not? Why must the praying lion still become a child? The child is innocent and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a wheel rolling out of itself, a first movement, a sacred yes saying. Yes, for the game of creation, my brothers, a sacred yes saying is required. The spirit wants its will. The one lost to the world now wins its own world. 3 metamorphoses of the spirit I name for you. How the spirit became a camel, and the camel a lion, and finally the lion a child. Thus spoke Zarathustra, and then he sojourned into the town which is called the Motley Cow. So sorry, go on.
Interesting way of structuring that with 3 different forms. This is so different. I'm thinking of this is the polar opposite of Karl Marx.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the lion being this sacred no to things, sacred note to traditional morality, sacred note to duty, to what he's supposed to do. He can become king, but he's not creating anything new. For that, the child is required, for its innocent, for it being a new beginning, being able to laugh about himself, not to take things too seriously, to create something new, to make something its own.
Also,
That is the child.
children are oftentimes more honest and more fair when it comes to freedom of choice. As people get older, they get more and more invested in ideologies and entrenched in them. So they, in my opinion, they don't really give a lot of different ideas a fair shake. They more or less say, how does this relate to my prevailing idea and how can I defend my prevailing idea? Whereas a child has a different kind of freedom there where they're being presented things for the first time and they can simply think about them and see if it makes sense. So yeah, having some flexibility and also fairness, like kids practice fairness before we're taught and conditioned to think certain ways. It's definitely a big part of freedom of expression. So the camel is kind of about enduring the weight of existence in the world. The lion is about challenging it and standing up to it. And the child is about seeing it for what it is and having a good time within it.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think it's also important here to kind of stress that these are free transformations of the spirit. So basically the spirit is spirit before. So it as spirit becomes camel, becomes lion, becomes child. So it's free metamorphoses, but 4 different forms.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess there is shortcutting in between, but for the child to be childlike, to really embrace that philosophy of Nietzsche, it needs to have come through those other stages.
Mm-hmm.
So being a sacred yes to things, you need to first have understood the way things were, having taken them all on, then being a sacred no to them before being able to embrace them once more, or embrace your own thing once more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's more value in making a choice if you know the multitude of options about it and you choose that one, as opposed to if you just started as a child and you didn't also go through the camel and the lion, then that might have been your only available option, and there isn't really that much interesting about that. I like the analogy of more happiness in reaching the peak of a mountain by hiking up there as opposed to helicoptering up there. That makes a lot of sense. You helicopter up there and you're thinking like, all right, I'm glad the helicopter was fine at this altitude. I'm going to try to watch the air that's flopping around on the top of it so I don't get knocked over or whatever. Maybe I can walk around at the top of this, but you're very much full energy. You're now outside when you're inside the helicopter before then, as opposed to hiking up it. You have that long, slow grind of gradually making a few steps up here and there and then stopping and looking and then managing your own like energy input and output. And then as you get closer to it and you're getting tired, you feel hopeful and excited. But yeah, there's a lot more emotion to something that involves a struggle. And I joked in chat about like playing StarCraft and Dota as examples of games that use that as a mechanism to them, where you have to work pretty hard for a while to get a win. Like in StarCraft, it could be 5 to 15 minutes of hard combat against an opponent, and then with Dota, it could be 25 minutes to an hour of slogging at it. But the Nietzsche guy, he's onto something there.
One of his, I don't think it's one of his most famous sayings, but one that always resonates with me is, all great thoughts are perceived when walking. So Nietzsche, although he didn't know it yet, he was opposed to helicopter rides up the mountains.
He's an anti-helicopterist.
Yeah, absolutely. So since you're not in a game, do you want to read the next one?
Yeah, sure. On the teachers of virtue.
No. We're not gonna go through all of them. And I think we'll skip the next one I outlined. I'll tell you which the next will be. Like I'm not saying the other ones are bad. We don't have the time to go through the whole book. So
True.
there's different interesting chapters that we're gonna read. So we're gonna skip The Child with the Mirror because it's a bit too weird, I guess. And we'll look at The Stillest Hour. So that would be book 3, if I'm not mistaken. Oh no, it's the last book of the second part.
Last book of the second part. Found it. The Stillest Hour. What happened to me, my friends? You see me distraught, chased away, reluctantly obedient, prepared to go. Alas, to go away from you. Yes, once again Zarathustra must return to his solitude, but this time the bear returns to his cave unwillingly. What happened to me? Who commanded this? Alas, my angry mistress wills it so. She spoke to me. Did ever mention her name to you? Yesterday toward evening my stillest hour spoke to me. That is the name of my terrible mistress. And this is how it happened, for I must tell you everything, so your hearts do not harden against the one who must depart abruptly. Do you know the terror of the one who is falling asleep? He is stricken with terror down to his toes because the ground is fading and the dream begins. This I say to you as a parable. Yesterday, at the stillest hour, the ground faded from me. The dream began. The hand advanced. The clock of my life drew a breath. Never had I heard such stillness around me, so that my heart was terrified. Then without voice it spoke to me. You know it, Zarathustra? And I cried out in terror on hearing this whispering, and the blood drained from my face, but I kept silent. Then it spoke to me once more, without voice. You know it, Zarathustra, but you do not speak it. And at last I answered defiantly. Indeed, I know it, but I do not want to speak it. Then it spoke to me again without voice. You do not want to, Zarathustra. Is it even true? Do not hide in your defiance. And I wept and trembled like a child and spoke. Oh, I wanted to, yes, but how can I? Spare me this one thing. It is beyond my strength. Then it spoke to me again without voice. What do you matter, Zarathustra? Speak your word and break. And I answered, Alas, it is my word? Who am I? I am waiting for one more worthy. I am not worthy even of breaking under it. Then it spoke to me again without voice. What do you matter? You are not yet humble enough for me. Humility has the toughest hide. And I answered, What has the hide of my humility not borne already? I dwell at the foot of my height. How high are my peaks? No one yet has told me. But well do I know my valleys. Then it spoke to me again without voice. O Zarathustra, whoever has mountains to move must also move valleys and hollows. And I answered, As of yet my words have moved no mountains, and what I spoke did not reach mankind. I went to human beings, to be sure, but I have not yet arrived among them. Then it spoke to me again without voice. What do you know of that? The dew lands on the grass when the night is most silent. And I answered, They mocked me when I found and walked my own way, and in truth my feet trembled at that time. And thus they spoke to me, You have forgotten the way, and now you are forgetting how to walk too. Then it spoke to me again without voice. What does their mockery matter? You are one who has forgotten how to obey. Now you shall command. Do you not know who is needed most by everyone? The one who commands great things. To accomplish great things is difficult, but what is even more difficult is to command great things. That is what is most unforgivable in you. You have the power, and you do not want to rule. And I answered, I lack the lion's voice for all commanding. Then it spoke to me again like a whispering. The stillest words are those that bring the storm. Thoughts that come on the feet of doves steer the world. O Zarathustra, you shall go as a shadow of that which must come. Thus you will command and lead the way commanding. And I answered, I am ashamed. Then it spoke to me again without voice. You must become a child again, and without shame. The pride of youth is still on you. You became young at a late time. But whoever will become a child must also overcome his youth. And I thought for a long time and trembled. At last, however, I said what I said at first. I do not want to. Then laughter broke out around me. Alas, how this laughter tore my entrails and slit open my heart. And it spoke to me one last time. O Zarathustra, your fruits are ripe, but you are not ripe for your fruits. Thus you must return to your solitude, for you shall yet become mellow. And again there was laughing, and it vanished. Then it became still around me, as if with twofold stillness, but I lay on the ground, and the sweat poured from my limbs. Now you have heard everything, and why I must return to my solitude. I withheld nothing from you, my friends, but hear this from me as well. I, who am still the most tight-lipped of human beings, and want to be so. Oh, my friends, there is still something I could tell you. There is still something I could give you. Why do I not give it? Am I stingy? But when Zarathustra had spoken these words, he was overcome by the force of his pain, and the nearness of parting from his friends, so that he wept out loud, and no one was able to comfort him. At night, however, he went away alone and left his friends. The Stillest Hour. Welcome, Raiders. We are going through a book by Nietzsche called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Not reading the whole thing through, but we're discussing it. So for this one, he has a lot of allegory and comparison in this. His stillest hour is his mistress, and it's commanding him to leave and go back to the mountain. So we skipped a bunch of the book, but it seems like the people in town didn't accept Zarathustra's message.
Well, it's being a prophet is a difficult thing to do. People like it's hard to yell I will within a herd of camels.
Mm-hmm.
They are all bound to the dragon's thou shalt.
Mm-hmm.
So you will likely not be perceived well. And Zarathustra's message here, or he had to the people, was of overcoming, of looking beyond what is perceived as good and bad, right or wrong, and just to look beyond the notions that we have established. And this message was not perceived well. And so what the mistress that talks to him is basically his own self-doubt, and how he knows what he has to teach, but he's reluctant to do it. He's fearful of doing it. And he fears what the reaction will be to it. So he decides that he once more needs to go into solitude. And there could be two reasons for that. One thing would be because he's too scared and he doesn't want to do anymore. Like he runs away because he needs to become the child from the lion that he's to some degree is portraying in the first and second part of the book, in order to become a child. The second reason would be to refine his message. So there's like a egoistic reason to leave the people behind, and there's also a altruistic reason is to find the right wording, to find the things he wants to say, he needs to say, so that the people will understand you and will take on his message.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the difference between being able to articulate an idea for yourself and feel like it's good, and then the separate aspect, which is being able to convey it to other people in a way that they get behind it as well. So it seems like Zarathustra went to the mountains, figured out some really awesome stuff, went into town, and it was just dead fish. People were not having it. It wasn't good. And Zarathustra probably wasn't, for the 10 years, trying to figure out how to convince people of something. It was how to perceive the truth and the nature of things. But then there's another truth that you have to learn, which is how to convince people, which is sort of a charisma and motivational task. How do you shepherd them in that direction? Zarathustra used the term shepherd quite a few times in the prologue that I read. But I feel like that's a big part of how philosophers work and religious leaders work, is they point in the direction of certain ideological frameworks, and people can be more or less receptive to those based on the charisma of the thinker or the religious figure, and also the merits and the logic of what's being presented.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think in D&D terms, what happened was Zarathustra took his time, went into the mountains, and fought so hard and so long until he rolled a nat 20 on wisdom. And he thought, well, I have it all figured out now, went into town, and first charisma check, nat 1, and he was back out of there.
Yep. Damn.
So, interestingly, this chapter, when I first read the book, which is roughly 20 years ago by now, it didn't really resonate with me. It only later, I saw its value, I guess, or I perceived it for what it's trying to tell me, or to tell the reader. I think there's one line there that people that aspire to be like Nietzsche or to be like Zarathustra, to be able to teach something, you need to be wary of what would you want the people's reaction to be like. So I would imagine if Nietzsche specifically, but also Zarathustra, went into town and preaching his new gospel, people were cheering for him, he'd be a lot more suspicious than when people just were denouncing him and thinking he was a crazy person.
Mm-hmm.
So if the people embrace what you're saying, you're probably either your message is too easily understood and too simplistic, or you're just deceiving people. Mm-hmm. But the message he wants to basically to put the seed into people's minds of his message. It will take a long time for it to grow and to become something bigger, a bigger thought. So the line, the stillest words are those that bring the storm. Thoughts that come on the feet of doves steer the world. Is just this beautiful saying that makes you realize it's not the big speech that will make you cheer for it in the moment because it was so eloquent and it was speaking from your heart, but it's those small things that will eventually lead to you to realize a different world, to have this plant grow from it, or to have the storm come from it. So basically, I read this every once in a while when I feel kind of doubtful about whether or not it's worth for me to pursue philosophy as a topic in general. And it's a good thing that you like the that voice of self-doubt, to not shut it out, to have it, to be playful with it, because it's also a part of you, or a part of Zarathustra in this case, where you need to confront that which is holding you back and not push it away outright. That's why I said like the egoistic or the altruistic reason of leaving the people again, or leaving his brothers again and going to the mountains. There's a good or bad way for doing it for. He could be doing it for. And in confronting this fear, he says, all right, I'm not ready yet. I want to. He basically starts by, I do not want to tell it, but then he says, all right, I kind of do, but I'm scared of it, but I need to take some more time and thinking about it, and thus I need to leave society, and I will return once I'm ready again.
Did he then go do something in his own life like that? Like when he's writing this, was that an allegory for his own personal journey of he felt like he figured stuff out and he put his initial message out there and it wasn't received, so he needed to go meditate more?
So I can't tell you for certain what he did, but he wrote the first two parts in, I think, like a week, maybe two, which is crazy because it's considered the second best German prose after what's the guy's name? Goethe. So this is like the most eloquent German writing, or second most eloquent German writer writing there is. And writing the first two parts in a couple of weeks, it's just an affront to everyone that aspires to be a writer.
You're making us all look bad.
Absolutely. And after the first two parts, he took a break for a while, and I'm not sure what he did. But I suppose since he was still in Sils Maria, he did go for a walk onto the mountain to kind of figure out, all right, how to refine the messaging, or how, like, what am I even going on about? What should the outcome of this book be? Because I guess he, and this is me going out on a limb, I'm not privy to what was going on in his mind. I think he needed to figure out where this all should be going and what else there was for him, Nietzsche, but also for Zarathustra to say. And it's obvious here that, like, by the end of the second part, he had this debilitating self-doubt that was stopping him, that was keeping him from continue writing, or from Zarathustra to continue talking. And he wants to be taken serious, and he wants people to understand what he has to say, and wants them to take it both lightheartedly but also serious. And it's not the response that he got, so that is kind of debilitating. And I see how this could break someone, and I think it's awesome that he found a way up onto his mountains, his heights. So in terms of the analogy he uses, and it's part of this as well, it's being on top of the mountain is being your higher self, and being down in the valley or being with the people is kind of this lower state of self, or the I guess you could call it the more
I would call it the compromising self, because when he's on the mountaintop, he's pursuing whatever his spirit is guiding him toward, and he's unperturbed and unharassed, and there's no one else who's trying to drive him in a different direction. So you get to exist in that isolated state where you get to do whatever you want to. And then when you go down into the valley, or if you're in just a tough personal situation, you're being driven in directions by other forces than yourself. So it's hard to be pure and untainted in that sense. We have a viewer in chat who read every volume of Nietzsche during their philosophy studies, and they're a German native speaker. Nice.
All right, I have to look through those comments to see all the things that are wrong so far.
Yeah, there's a progressive deathcore is the name of the genre, but it's a band called Slice the Cake, Odyssey to the West, and it has a lot of similar themes to this, where the main character, who's the person who's doing the vocals and stuff throughout the album, is someone who is being either killed or exiled. They're given the option, I think, to get the heck out, either by dying or by going somewhere else, and he goes with the pilgrimage option, and he goes far into the West and totally isolates himself. There's no people or civilization over there, so he's kind of just out in the woods and the mountains, and he goes through some similar experiences to this, where he grapples with fear and doubt and isolation and his own fear and, I guess, shame of not being as bold and powerful, I guess, as he hoped that he would be in changing the world. Because a lot of times you have this process of a prophet feels like something needs to be done, something needs to be understood better, so they go out into nature and they just isolate themselves so they can think about it without being bothered by other stuff. And if they think for a long time, they're going to learn a lot of stuff about reality and about how they see it and kind of what it sees in you. But it's unpleasant in a lot of ways. And it's cool that Nietzsche is really open with what he's vulnerable about and what he's afraid of. And a lot of these fears are pretty universal human fears. Wondering if what you're doing is good enough. I think everyone has that fear of self-doubt. I definitely do. As a content creator, just the voice of doubt of, is this content valuable enough? Like, should I be making this? Should I make this video? Is it actually something that's going to add to other people's experience? Is the stream funny enough today? Like, are you entertaining enough? And then you have all the other people who are also trying to pursue that. So, yeah, the voice of doubt is something that's with everyone. The question is, how loud is it in your mind, and how much control does it have over what you do or don't do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the question, like the reason why he's going back to the mountains, or how to do this kind of value judgment of it, is not whether or not he leaves for the mountain now, but if he comes back or not.
Mm-hmm.
So going back into his solitude to confront his own fear or to rethink his own teachings is, quote unquote, a good thing, as long as he is able to return again and not be consumed by that self-doubt.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember if this was a book or a film or something that I'd heard of, but I think there was a character that had multiple aspects within itself, and those were all written as members of a hunting party. And I think of a lot of our mind and our consciousness like that, where we have different competing urges within a human being, and they're not always after the same thing. Sometimes they're in direct conflict with each other. Like, you can't pursue both of two things that you might want, and the individual, the endpoint, has to pick something, go in a direction, or not make a move. But if you can identify those different aspects of yourself, sometimes it can help you to organize your thinking a little bit. Like, know that, for example, you crave sweet snacks or something like that, and being able to understand that's an aspect of myself and of my body that has a set of goals to it, and I'm an individual who is the total of all of those different things. Maybe you have another goal, which is to work on your fitness and health and that kind of thing. So those two things can be in opposition to each other, and for you to be your best self means to basically be in control of that whole storm that's within you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's different, Nietzsche would say, different moralities that shine upon ourselves and kind of guide the way towards what we aspire towards. And one of his first major philosophical work was of the teleology of morals, where he talks about where is our morality coming from. And this is where he kind of takes apart the notion of that our morality, like the, not specifically the distinction between the master and slave morality just yet, but how our morality was or is coming from this notion of needing to survive in a harsh environment and needing to be of servitude to some kind of master, and this being very pronounced in the early Abrahamic religions. And this not being moral just for the sake of moral, but this being moral because it was a necessity for survival. And this would have been a reason to break with it once it's not necessarily for survival anymore. But also that there are like the exploring of where those values we have come from will lead you towards understanding it more and being able to make a more informed choice on whether or not you want to follow it.
Yeah, using the D&D example, I'm kind of thinking of a religious set of ideas as like holding a book, and that gives you stats like buffs and debuffs depending on what the ideology is. So for something like Christianity, it is conducive in a sense to respecting the prevailing authorities. So if you're in maybe a harsh governing zone and you have that as your idea set, you are less likely to clash with the authorities in a way that would endanger yourself. So it's an overall increase in the chance of your survival. And I think sort of like different aspects of our body types and our strengths and weaknesses, our ideas also are selected. If people had ideas that told them that they should all drink some particular poisonous thing and then they all died, well, the idea set didn't carry on. It was selected out, basically. So the big hitter religions that have had the greatest impact on people, I do think have had real survival benefits in group cohesion. One of the biggest ones is it transcends an ethnic tribalism where you're just looking at your family tree and you're looking out for yourself, your nuclear family, and then people who are the closest blood relatives to you the most. With a religious belief system, you're oftentimes looking at who is a member of this belief system, and we look out for all of them. So you expand the tribe beyond just the family who is related to each other by genes. You expand to people who are together by beliefs, which increases the group size, which means they have an advantage over other groups that are just family ties only.
Yeah, and this is a subject we talked about a bunch of this increasing sphere of moral consideration, where nowadays we're much more in tune with animals should have rights, or that women should have rights, or that black people should have rights, which sounds kind of stupid because it seems obvious, but this wasn't always the case. And as you rightfully said, I guess compared to what came before, religion having this kind of social aspect of putting people on the same level and you being a brother to your neighbor is better than everyone just looking for themselves. And in this regard, it was definitely a good thing, and it enriched society. The problems arises, as with everything, where the in-group has an out-group to compete with, and we start having things like crusades or any kind of religious warfare where there's just a huge amount of people that fight against another huge amount of people, which is considerably worse than just one family fighting against the other. So it scales the good things as well as the bad things. One comment I saw that I want to give a quick shout out is, I think this is the same person that read all of the books. Yeah. So he was reading towards the end of Philos-o-clock, and it says, and I don't remember this, that the church bell rang, and he was sitting in the garden and the church bell was ringing, so he had this enchanted feeling, like you feel kind of connected to the book, or you feel the book is connected to you. And I've been reading the book for off and on for 20 years, so every once in a while I get bored, or I feel like this is a good time to kind of just open up a random page and see what's written there. And I've had this kind of connection to the book, not this same experience, but just like this the book feeling related to you as a person, or the moment you just went through on multiple occasions. And one of the reasons for this is that he just invokes so many different imageries and so many different things that it's easy to find something that resonates with you in the moment. But also because there's so much stuff in there that is just really good and will leave you with something to, like, having that little seed of thought in you that will grow up to be a plant. So this book is so interesting to me because it constantly changes. Not the book itself, it stays the same for the most part, but it's the interpretation of what you're reading will change over time. Sometimes radically, sometimes just a little bit, but you're never reading the same book twice.
Yeah, in some ways, that's how some people will use the Bible. For me, Bruce Lee and Sun Tzu, they're redeemed by channel points, so I do the same thing where I just flip it open to a random page and then pick something that seems kind of relevant to what's been going on. But if you get any book that is like really value dense across the whole thing, you can do that, and it's kind of fun to just roll the dice on, I'm just opening it to this page, and then you look for something, and it's exciting because it gives you spontaneous knowledge, and oftentimes it's something that you know from before, but since you've read it before, you've had time to process how it relates to your life, so it's more rich the later times that you read it. And if you don't go in the order of the book normally, then yeah, that's pretty cool. Now, definitely an interesting way that you can use certain books. A lot of books you wouldn't really do that with. It has to be something that's pretty, I don't know, contemplative, something that has a lot of life application to it. This book definitely seems to. It challenges the reader in a lot of ways. So it's not really an easy read that pats you on the back.
No, and I think, again, I'm going out on a limb here, that I don't know what Nietzsche was thinking when he wrote it, or what his goal was, that he wants to challenge the reader, but he also wants the reader to kind of be playful with it, kind of in that child's mindset, to not always take him seriously, but to be playful with how they go about not only reading it but interpreting it, and seeing what there is in there that makes more sense to them and what makes a bit less sense to them. We purposefully skipped over the chapter on women. Yeah, there's some things we probably wouldn't get a good resonance on nowadays. Probably he didn't back in his days now. So yeah, not all of his thinking would be considered to be good, and as we will talk about on another segment, a lot of his thinking turned out to be problematic when misused. This was during the reign of the Nazi Party in Germany. They kind of ran afoul with some of his ideas, but we'll get into that another time. Yeah, so it's just rich in terms of the images it invokes and the different ideas you yourself could get from the book that are not originally Nietzsche's ideas, but are things that are within your mind, and he just finds a way of drawing them out of you, which is really beautiful.
Nice. Well, I'm stoked to read this now. I read the prologue. It's not a super long book. I think I got to, let's see. Yeah, I got to page 25. It's 300, so it's pretty long. 300-ish for this translation. And you said you've read through it how many times?
I can for sure say that I read it front to back 3 times. And then I've just I take it on travels with me a lot, just because it's when I'm kind of looking for something quick to read and want something to kind of stimulate my mind. I always love to take a peek in it. So I couldn't tell you how many times I've read specific chapters because they kind of resonate with something. And these are the chapters that we're reading today because they're kind of they resonate more with me, and this is probably not true for other readers of the book. Interestingly, when I spoke with, it's a famous book, a lot of people have read it, but I've never spoke to someone that read the same Zarathustra as I did. So it's a weird book in that way, where people just interpret a lot of their own things into it, as I do, and you can discuss 2 different books that are the same book, where you just have wildly different interpretations of what you were reading and what he was on about.
And you had 2 more sections that you wanted to cover in this one?
Yeah, I think we're already approaching the 1.5 hour mark, so I think we do 1 more chapter.
Vision and riddle or tablets?
Vision and the riddle, because it's... Yeah, you'll see. It's a good one. I like it.
Nice.
Alright. I'll do the reading again, but I'll take a quick bio break before that.
Okay.
Hello, Twitch chat. Appreciate people hanging out and contributing to the conversation. Ananas, Overwatch, Hand of Baskerville, Ventanhe. Hello, welcome. A bio break, yes. Not to be confused with a mech break, which is when you would go and tinker with some gears and some bars and just heavy stuff. Hello. Hello. Yeah, it's interesting trying to figure out your ideas and perspective and stuff. With Nietzsche, it's a secular worldview, where it's like, where's God? And then he goes into town, he said there's not one. And they're like, well, shit, what do we do? He's like, I don't know. Wishing all American friends in the chat a very merry Patriots Day. Patriots Day. Who qualifies as a patriot? It's not Veterans Day. It's people who are specifically like, America.
You love my summary. Thanks for the TLDR version.
I assumed that Patriots Day comment was a reference to January 6th. So, yeah, there's that.
Oh, is it?
Going out on a limb here, I don't know what they meant with it, but that's like I was on the toilet and I heard you say that and I thought like, is it January 6th? Yes, it is. Yeah.
Oh, I just Googled it and it says it's April 17th. But yeah, maybe some people are saying that. Is that what that's about? Silly. All right, we got the vision and the riddle. Chat's giving us some riddles. Guilty. Haha. You got him at J for Tomb.
I tend to only read stuff that is at least 100 years old, but I'm not completely off the planet when it comes to what is happening around us. Although I am blissfully ignorant of most of internet culture.
Nodders.
On the vision and the riddle. So for those of you reading along, this is the second chapter of the third part. And I guess I could just link this once more if we have other people wanting to read along. So part 3, chapter 2. When it was rumored among the sailors that Zarathustra was on the ship, so he's on the ship obviously, for a man who came from the Blast of the Isles went on the board at the same time as him, then a great curiosity and anticipation arose. But Zarathustra kept silence for 2 days and was cold and deaf with sadness, such that he answered neither to glances nor questions. On the evening of the second day, however, he opened his ears again, even though he continued to be silent, for there was much that was peculiar and dangerous to be heard on this ship, which had come from far away and went to go still further. But Zarathustra was a friend of all who make a distant journey and do not live to live without danger. And so, finally, his own tongue was freed while listening, and the ice of his heart broke. Then he began to speak thus. To you, bold searchers, researchers, and whoever put to terrible seas with cunning sails. To you, the riddle drunk, the twilight happy, whose souls are lured by flutes to every maelstrom. Because you do not want to probe along a thread with cowardly hands, and because where you can guess, there you hate to deduce. To you alone I tell you the riddle that I saw, the vision of the loneliest one. Darkly I walked recently through cadaver-colored twilight, darkly and hard, biting my lip. Not only one sun has set for me. A path that climbed defiantly through boulders, malicious, lonely path consoled neither by weed nor shrub. A mountain path crunched under defiance of my foot. Striding mutely over the mocking clatters of pebbles, crushing the rock that caused it to slip, thus my foot forced its way upward. Upward, in defiance of the spirit that pulled it downward, the spirit of gravity, my devil of arch-enemy. Upward, even though he sat atop me, half-dwarf, half-mole, lame, paralyzing, dripping lead into my ear, lead-dropping thoughts into my brain. "Oh, Zarathustra," he mumbled scornfully, syllable by syllable, "you stone of wisdom, you hurled yourself high, but every hurled stone must fall." O Zarathustra, you stone of wisdom, you sling stone, you star crusher, you hurled yourself so high, but everly hurled stone must fall. Sentenced to yourself and to your own stoning, O Zarathustra, far indeed you hurled the stone, but it will fall back down upon you. Then the dwarf became silent, and that lasted a long time, but his silence oppressed me, and being at two in such a way truly makes one lonelier than being at one. I climbed, I dreamed, I fought, but everything oppressed me. I resembled a sick person whose severe agonies make him weary and who is then jarred out of falling asleep by even worse dreams. But there is something in me that I called courage. This so far has slain my every discourage. This courage at last commanded me to stand still and to say, Dwarf, you or I? Courage, after all, is the best slayer. Courage that attacks, for in every attack there is sounding bliss. But the human being is the most courageous animal, and so it overcame every animal. With sounding brass, it even overcame every pain, but human pain is the deepest pain. Courage also slays dizziness at the abyss, and where do human beings not stand at the abyss? Is seeing itself not being the abyss? Courage is the best slayer. Courage slays every pity, but pity is the deepest abyss, and as deeply as human beings look into life, so deeply too they look into suffering. But courage is the best slayer. Courage that attacks, it slays even death, for it says, was that life? Well then, one more time. In such saying, however, there is much sounding brass. He who had his ears to hear, let him hear.
The sounding brass, is that like the brum, 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 brum? Seems like they're drawing upon that if he's specifying horns, trumpets, trombones, tubas.
Yeah, he's invoking a lot of things. So basically, this is second part. So he went back into the mountains upon having this self-doubt, and when he came back down again, he was on these islands that he parted from by boat. So he's on this boat, and now he tells this riddle that is basically it's the riddle of him walking up the mountain after he left humanity, and this kind of being a different it's kind of similar to the darkest hour in terms of self-doubt. It's this heaviness that pulls him down, and the heaviness being pity, or the heaviness being his own but also other people's suffering. And so this is the overcoming of the bad things, the basically the part where the line becomes the child. So this no to all things bad becomes this full-on yes to everything. So where is it? Here. Was that life? Well then, one more time. So this is the all-embracing yes to things, even though they might be bad, even though they might feel crushing at a time, even though you have gnome half mole thing on your back saying discouraging thing into your ears. This is life, and if you embrace it, you will want to take it on once more.
Yep, everybody's got that voice in the back of their head that's telling them that they can't, or that it's all going to be futile in the end. And having that force of courage, where courage is, it's not the absence of fear, it's deciding to press on in the presence of fear. And that's pretty big. So being able to identify those scary situations, to identify whatever forces you decide that you want to stand up against, and then to be able to say that for yourself, like the you or I. An open challenge to reality. Is that all you've got? Because I'm just getting warmed up.
All right, so let's go through the second part, and then we've done enough reading for, I guess, 2 weeks or however long it takes till we are on again. So yeah, Zarathustra is taking on this battle with the dwarf, with the heavy weight that is pulling everything down. Again, to come back to the first chapter we wrote, this is the transformation from lion to child, where the sacred no to things becomes a sacred yes.
Do you want me to get this one?
Oh yeah, sure.
Stop, dwarf, I said. I or you. But I am the stronger of us too. You do not know my abysmal thought. That you could not bear. Then something happened that made me lighter, for the dwarf jumped down from my shoulder, the inquisitive one, and he crouched upon a stone there before me. But right there where we stopped was a gateway. See this gateway, dwarf? I continued. It has 2 faces. 2 paths come together here. No one has yet walked them to the end. This long lane back, it lasts an eternity. And that long lane outward, that is another eternity. They contradict each other, these paths. They blatantly offend each other. And here at this gateway is where they come together. The name of the gateway is inscribed at the top. Moment. But whoever were to walk one of them further, and even further and ever on, do you believe, dwarf, that these paths contradict each other eternally? All that is straight lies, murmured the dwarf, contemptuously. All truth is crooked. Time itself is a circle. You spirit of gravity, I said angrily, do not make it too easy on yourself, or I shall leave you crouching here where you crouch, lame foot, and I bore you this high. See this moment, I continued. From this gateway, moment, a long eternal lane stretches backward. Behind us lies an eternity. Must not whatever can already have passed this way before? Must not whatever can happen already have happened, been done, passed by before? And if everything has already been here before, what do you think of this moment, dwarf? Must this gateway, too, not already have been here? And are not all things firmly knotted together in such a way that this moment draws after it all things to come, therefore itself as well? For whatever can run, even in this long lane outward, must run once more. And this slow spider that creeps in the moonlight, and this moonlight itself, and I and you in the gateway whispering together, whispering of eternal things, must not all of us have been here before? And return and run in that other lane outward before us, in this long eerie lane, must we not return eternally? Thus I spoke softer and softer, for I was afraid of my own thought and secret thoughts. Then suddenly I heard a dog howl nearby. Had I ever heard a dog howl like this? My thoughts raced back. Yes, when I was a child, in my most distant childhood. Then I heard a dog howl like this, and I saw it too, bristling, its head up, trembling in the stillest midnight, when even dogs believe in ghosts. So that I felt pity, For the full moon had passed over the house, silent as death, and it had just happened, a round smolder, stopped on the flat roof, just as on a stranger's property. That is why the dog was so horror-stricken, because dogs believe in thieves and ghosts, and when I heard it howl like this again, I felt pity once more. Where now was the dwarf, and the gateway, and the spider, and all the whispering? Was I dreaming? Was I waking? I stood all of a sudden among wild cliffs, alone, desolate, in the most desolate moonlight. But there lay a human being, and there the dog jumped, bristling, whining. Now it saw me coming, and then it howled again. It screamed. Had I ever heard a dog scream like this for help? And truly, I saw something the like of which I had never seen before. A young shepherd I saw, writhing, choking, twitching, his face distorted, with a thick black snake hanging from his mouth. Had I ever seen so much nausea and pale dread in one face? Surely he must have fallen asleep. Then the snake crawled into his throat, where it bit down firmly. My hand tore at the snake, and it tore in vain. It could not tear the snake from his throat. Then it cried out of me, bite down, bite off the head, bite down. Thus it cried out of me, my dread, my hatred, my nausea, my pity, all my good and bad cried out of me with one shout. You bold ones around me, you searchers, researchers, and whoever among you ever shipped out with cunning sails onto unexplored seas, you riddle-happy ones. Now guess me this riddle that I saw back then. Now interpret me this vision of the loneliest one. For it was a vision and a foretelling. What did I see then as parable? And who is it that must some day come? Who is the shepherd into whose throat the snake crawled this way? Who is the human being into whose throat everything that is heaviest, blackest will crawl? Meanwhile, the shepherd bit down, as my shout advised him. He bit with a good bite. Far away he spat the head of the snake, and he leaped to his feet. No longer shepherd, no longer human, a transformed, illuminated, laughing being. Never yet on earth had I heard a human being laugh as he laughed. Oh, my brothers, I heard a laughter that was no human laughter, and now a thirst gnaws at me, a longing that will never be still. My longing for this laughter gnaws at me. Oh, how I can bear to go on living, and how I could bear to die now. Thus spoke Zarathustra. So what does the snake symbolize?
Oh, the snake is the heaviness of the world that will creep into your mouth overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have other people pull at it and it will not loosen. But once you have this defiant yes towards life, you'll be able to bite down, bite his head off, bite down, and chew off the head of the snake that crawled into you. And be able to transform yourself and laugh a laughter that is no human laughter. So yeah, this is the transformation from man to Ubermensch, as described by Zarathustra. This is the biting down onto the world, and I'm guessing not digesting it because he spit it out, but to take on the heaviness, to become the lion, but then to become the child again.
Mm-hmm.
So this is it's the easiest way to describe Nietzsche's Ubermensch, which is still super difficult, but since the concept has been taken to mean a lot of different things and has been problematically been translated to Superman into the English, which was okay at the time, but after the Marvel Superman came onto the plane of existence, we're seeing two different types of Superman there, where one is just super in terms of physical power and laser eyes and whatnot, and the other is um, overcoming the human condition.
Personal liberation. Understanding all the different restrictions and conditioning that are placed upon yourself and being able to transcend those. I think one of the aspects of this that I've personally thought about a decent bit before hearing about Nietzsche and all this is the notion that everyone was dealt a really specific time frame for when you were born and what your lifespan is going to be, kind of falling into the grand scheme of humanity so far. Like, you could have been dealt 100,000 years ago where maybe your tribe had fire, maybe it didn't, but you had no writing and you had no agriculture and you had a very small tribe size. Like, that could have been your deal. And a lot of people don't really think about the deal of time that we got, of like, we're here in 2023, we have a lot of different tools and stuff at our disposal. What are the different systems that are controlling and guiding us right now? And how can we see before and after that in a way that allows us to be more free and to kind of be more grateful of what it means to be human as we are?
Yeah, for Nietzsche to be fully human or to transcend humanity means to overcome oneself. There's one beautiful image that he puts in your mind, that when you want to transcend yourself, you need to climb the highest mountain, and once you're up there, you have to climb your own shoulders to be even higher.
Mm. What's the story, Wishbone? We did our first conversation about the philosopher Nietzsche, and we looked into Thus Spoke Zarathustra. We did some readings from it, and it's a different take on stuff compared to a lot of the prevailing opinions at the time and what came before that. He's definitely a maverick when it comes to ideas, challenging established norms, and I think one of the aspects of this whole set of ideas is that challenging the prevailing ideas, which he described as the form of the lion, is fundamental to this whole process. So you can't really just be a pacifist and just let whatever rules are put in place control you your whole life if you want to ascend to the next level. Excuse me. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. So this is one of his books, but I would guess that he's written quite a few. What would you lead into from this? Because I would guess that this isn't the only Nietzsche we're going to cover in Philos-o-clock.
I kind of want to start it out with just the beauty of his prose, which I feel is most prevalent in his Zarathustra. But I think next time we can kind of go about his life, how he got there, like the kind of pitfalls he went into, and some of the weirder stories that we have surrounding his existence from other sources, not from himself. Most notably, Carl Gustav Jung did lectures on Nietzsche, and he knew him through friends. So I don't think they've ever met, but he knew people that knew Nietzsche personally. So he has some really weird stories about him, and we're kind of looking at this whole notion of where did morality come from, where it's heading in terms of the Christian morality, why we ought to break with it, how and why we killed God in order to do that, and what this means in terms of his philosophy, but also in terms of pretty much all moral philosophy coming after Nietzsche. He took the seat in Basel, I think, at 23. He was super young when he got to be a teacher in Basel. Like barely after he promoted he was not a philosophy teacher, he was a philology teacher. So philology being the study of old languages. Just answering questions in chat. Yeah, so what did you think of the prose itself, like beyond the meaning that the two of us invoked into it? Like, what do you think of the writing?
I think it's really cool. I think it's, in a sense, more accessible to other people because he doesn't really use too much super fancy language. Like, it's meant to draw on concepts that everyone understands, like what a camel is and what a camel does, what a lion is, and the different aspects and feelings of things. I feel like he's really good at conveying the emotion of situations, and it's not dry like some other philosophy that feels like pretty boring and painstaking to get through. Like, he's saying some pretty crazy shit, and a lot of it's very abstract. So as a reader, it's really interesting to see where it's going, and it forces you to think actively as you're going. So it does have clear descriptions in the sense that the language is pretty easy to understand, but the concepts and then the way that he does the allegory and things look, I guess he's like describing very intense situations that are similar to how things were written in the Bible. Of there's a shepherd who has a huge snake coming out of his mouth biting his tongue. Like, that's not a normal situation that people encounter, but he's using this to describe a really difficult situation that people are in and how to overcome that in a way that is understandable. It's comprehensible, but it's definitely abstract. And then, as people pointed out in Twitch chat, it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So a lot of people could weave this in different ways. And I think he would be happy about that in a sense, because a lot of the spirit of his ideas is personal pursuits and freedom. So if you took the text and you related it to stuff in your own life and you threw out some stuff, in a sense, he's very Bruce Lee of take what is useful and drive in your own direction. So yeah, I like it. I don't get to read it in the original German, but it is fun to read in English too.
Yeah, it's a good, like a lot of people put a lot of time into translating these texts, where it's trying to convey the meaning as best as possible and not putting it word by word, because that would make it a lot more difficult. Interestingly, the versions that the German reader gets to enjoy are still, for the most part, in the old German. So there's a bunch of different, how do you call those? Basically things that were written differently back then than they are nowadays, which can make for some really bad marks in, what is it? Not grammar, but how you spell correctly. When you're in school and you start to write these things as Nietzsche would have done it, just because you've read him too much, which was what happened to me.
Spelling,
anyways,
spelling, pronunciation, or punctuation.
I guess spelling. Yeah. One more thing I wanted to say. Yeah. He, in his last work being the Icte Homo, behold human, or behold humanity. He basically is this meta book about his own writings, where he has chapters of why I'm such a great writer or why I write such good books, where he's sometimes critical, for the most part, not really, describes his own process and what he was doing, what he was trying to aim for. And he also describes his ideal readers, which is something quite interesting to behold, where it's like, yeah, you're the wrong dude to be reading what I say, and how dare you think you understand what I was trying to say. It's, yeah, he was a bit of an egomaniac, and he didn't. Well, at this point, he wasn't super well received out of really specific academic circles, so he had nothing to lose anymore. And this was basically a short time before his illness finally grasped him. So he had a stroke, and he was living out his last 10 years just being a husk of himself and being kept alive by his sister and his mother at the time. So yeah, his final stroke of genius was to kind of go to town on his own writing and his readers and how he should be perceived in the future, which is just, it's funny and sad at the same time, but it makes for some good reading as well.
Thus spoke Nietzsche. Y'all motherfuckers don't even know shit about what I was talking about. Stroke of genius. I don't know if he meant to do that, but he did that. Well, cool. Appreciate you coming on with this. I could definitely tell that you're a fan by how you're reading some of it, which is fun. It's good to be excited about stuff, and this is Etche Fatum's bread and butter when it comes to philosophers that are fun to read. Not necessarily correct about everything, but this is some spicy stuff. Spice it up. Thus spoke Zarathustra. This is episode 1 of this. So for Philos-o-clock, we'll visit him again, no doubt. But thank you, Etche Fatum, for coming on. And thank you, chat, for contributing to this conversation. Feel free to give any thoughts in the YouTube comments of this version if you would like to as well.
All right. Thanks for having me, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Excellent, sire. I hope you get some heckin' good snow for the snowboarding.
I assume it will. Winter will come at some point, and then it will just dump a bunch of snow, and we'll all be happy.
I wish you good snow and fruitful thoughts.
Thank you.
And we will see you on the next episode of Philos-o-clock with Etche Fatum.